In the copper extraction, we started with the converting. Converting is basically final stage of extraction of copper, and we produced molten matte in the previous stage, matte melting stage, and then we have taken in a this molten matte into a copper in a converter, which is a cylindrical Peir-Smith type of unit, where air or oxygen enriched air is blown through the liquid matte phase, and then from here the liquid copper is produced. But in this stage there are two, in this process there are two distinct stages. First stage is the slagging of slag scheming, where in the initial part when we blow oxygen in the liquid matte, iron sulfide which is coming along with the matte is getting oxidized to iron oxide, FeO or Fe3O4. This FeO or Fe3O4 is low. There is a lot of sound. There's a lot of sound coming. This FeO or Fe3O4 is made to react with silica to form of FeOSiO2 type of slag containing solid crystal of Fe3O4. Oxidation of sulfide is autogeneous, rather it produces sufficient amount of heat, therefore it is autogeneous process, and even to utilize the excess amount of heat that is generated, copper returns in the form of what is produced within the factory, or even those copper scrap is added in the bath. And the slagging of, we do not add the entire amount of matte in one go. What is done is that matte is added in stages. You first add a certain amount of liquid matte, blow oxygen, generate this slag, skim it off, add fresh amount of matte, and continue the same process. So in this process, the majority of the iron that is coming in the form of iron sulfide is getting removed. We started with the iron content somewhere around 12 to 16%, and then the slagging off stage is considered to be complete when the bath contains around 1% iron. Then my second stage starts. Second stage is blister copper formation. In this part, the copper sulfide, the bath contains majority as copper sulfide, which is called white metal, and containing around 1% of iron. Then the copper sulfide reacts with oxygen to give you Cu2O, and this Cu2O in turn reacts with copper sulfide to give us elemental copper. The beauty of the whole process is that we do not need to add any external reducing agent in conversion of copper sulfide to copper. The copper oxide generated within the system acts as a reducing agent for converting copper sulfide to elemental copper. And the whole thing, the whole blister formation goes in again three distinct stages. Initially, if we calculate the sulfur content in the bath, it will turn out to be around 20%. In the very initial stage of a blow, when the sulfur content comes down to somewhere around 19.5 to 19.6%, there is a immiscibility gap. That means two liquids will come out from the single liquid which are not miscible to each other, and this goes on, and this makes the second phase that comes out as copper liquid contains around 1% sulfur. So the continuous conversion of copper sulfide 19.6% to elemental copper around 1% sulfur continues. The long bath has an average composition which is above 1% sulfur and below 19.6% sulfur. So this average mixture, when it is falling within that range, then the bath will be having dual phases or two phases. One phase is high in sulfur as Cu2S, another phase is liquid copper containing around 1% sulfur. So when this process continues, and ultimately we'll end up with bath containing all copper with 1% sulfur. The process does not end here. The blow continues, and the sulfur within the metal phase gradually gets removed in the form of sulfur dioxide, and sulfur in copper liquid falls to somewhere around 0.2 to 0.5%, and beyond this period the copper starts getting oxidized, and the fume that comes out of the furnace converts or gives a greenish color. The color of the fume gives an indication about completion of the conversion stage, and the iron content, the oxygen content varies somewhere around 0.02 to 0.05%. If we cool down this metal containing 0.1%, 0.2% sulfur and 0.02% oxygen, then during cooling itself, solubility goes down, the sulfur and oxygen dissolved reacts to form sulfur dioxide and makes a blister on the surface of the solidified copper block. That is why it is called as a blister copper. It is somewhere around 99% pure, but that is not good enough for my subsequent operation, especially for electrical appliances. So we need to purify it further. And the purification done in two stages. First process is called fire refining, where the liquid copper containing that 0.2 to 0.5% sulfur is again charged, and then oxygen is blown. So in that process, the sulfur is brought down to 0.002%, which is 1/10 of the initial part, and oxygen little higher, but the oxygen is a deterrent for my good property. So we need to really go for reduction of oxygen. That is some reductant like oil or hydrocarbon are injected in the bath, and oxygen is brought down to around 0.15%. So subsequent to this, it is around 99.7% pure. This 99.7% pure is again subjected to electrolyte refining. It is in a bath of copper sulfide, copper sulfate, and H2SO4 with water, and finally we get pure copper of our desired composition. That is where we ended our last class. Okay, fine. So let us go ahead for my next target, that electrolytic extraction of aluminium. The reason for my selecting this metal is multi-fold. The first one is that aluminium has turned out to be one of the very important non-ferrous metal just after copper, because of few unique properties like its thermal conductivity, electrical conductivity, and most important is its excellent weight to strength to weight ratio. It can give as an alloy. It is a fantastic alloy which can be of fairly high strength. In fact, once upon a time, aluminium lithium alloy was considered to be one of the competitor for steel in different structural application, and it also has excellent malleable property. You can give any form to aluminium based on this mechanical malleability and other properties. The aluminium has assumed a special important role in our human civilization today, and hello, and this is my first reason. Hello, lot of sound. Someone is using this microphone. Just please switch it off. Okay, and then my second reason is that the entire extraction process of aluminium is very unique in the sense that it involves hydrometallurgy and electrometallurgy. Okay, part of it is hydrometallurgy, part of it is electrometallurgy at relatively high temperature. The temperature is also not very low. It's a combination of all the three which makes the entire extraction process very attractive for learning. So that is what the reason for my taking up aluminium as my next candidate after copper. So this is my reference. You can go to the reference. You know the major source of aluminium. All of us know, I think you have read it during your school days, extraction of aluminium. I would try to add to some of the knowledges which is already existing with you. The major source of aluminium is bauxite, which contains somewhere around 58 to 67% alumina. This is not a theoretical value. What I am giving you is the bauxite, the alumina content in bauxite, which is available in India. The major impurities in this are basically TiO2, iron, and silica. Okay. TiO2 becomes one of the important constituent which we are rejecting from aluminium extraction. So which is treated later on for titanium extraction. I'll not cover that part, but only what I intend to say is that the Indian alumina bauxite contains around 58 to 67% alumina, and this is nothing but a mixture of two minerals. This is nothing but a mixture of two minerals. One mineral is called gibbsite, which is a trihydrate of alumina Al2O3, 3H2O containing around 65.4% Al2O3 theoretical value, and diaspore. Diaspore is monohydrate of alumina Al2O3 H2O containing very high amount of Al2O3 85.4%, which is a theoretical alumina content in diaspore. So bauxite is basically a mixture of gibbsite and diaspore in different proportion. Okay, so different places basically containing gibbsite and diaspore, but with different proportion, which ultimately decides the alumina content in bauxite, because it's becoming a mixture of 85.4% and 65.4%. So why aluminium extraction is so special? Because it is containing, as I said, it is containing the processes like hydrometallurgy, processes like electrometallurgy. What stops us from using this? Alumina is again an oxide of aluminium. The way we can treat iron oxide, why can't we treat aluminium oxide? That is also Fe2O3. Here also we are talking about Al2O3. So why can't we really adopt the same technique what we go for extraction of metal like iron? So reason behind is there are basically two reasons. The first of all, aluminium oxide or alumina. If you go back to the Illingham diagram, you will see that it is located towards the bottommost part of the diagram, which indicates very high stability of alumina. And that means if we want to go for a carbothermic reduction of alumina, then we have to employ very high temperature in the tune of 2000 degrees centigrade. Maintaining now imagine the complexity involved in a furnace or maintaining a furnace at 2000 degrees centigrade. First of all, how do we reach and maintain the temperature at 2000 degrees centigrade? Number one. Number two, at such a high temperature, we need to have very good uh, your refractory, which should not, which should withstand that temperature and does not get softened out. So very specialty type of refractory is needed to withstand such a high temperature. And such high temperature, aluminium has a tendency to react with carbon to form aluminium carbide, which will be very difficult to remove in the subsequent stages. But the impurity of aluminium carbide in aluminium makes it unsuitable for many applications. So carbothermic reduction of aluminium is somewhat ruled out. And the second is that the electrolysis of aluminium. Can we directly go to the electrolysis of aluminium salt in aqueous media? I say in aqueous media because then we have to dissolve it in aqueous media and try to electrolyze it. But this is not feasible because the decomposition voltage of alumina is high enough than decomposition of H2O, the water part of it. So much before the alumina gets decomposed, water will get decomposed and start liberating H2 hydrogen. So in fact, we'll be electrolyzing water rather than electrolyzing alumina. So there are, I wish you had certain coverage on electrometallurgy, but forget about for the time being. That just take a note that hydrogen overvoltage even sufficient to overcome 1.67 potential difference between what the decomposition of water and decomposition or electrolyzation of water and electrolyzation of alumina. So that such a high difference in the voltage is cannot be covered by hydrogen overvoltage. Okay. Is it clear what makes my what makes my aluminum extraction so special and difficult? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Okay. How many of you are in the meeting? Okay. How many of you are in the meeting? 8 or 9?
Sir, 11.
Okay. So looking at the difficulty that we cannot adopt carbothermic reduction, we cannot simply adopt the so-called the electrolysis in the common aqueous solution. We have to adopt some special route. What is that special route? So let us look at that. And the worldwide accepted route is Hall-Héroult process, which involves electrolysis of alumina dissolved in cryolite. So this is a new type of concept that came up, that we need to dissolve alumina first in cryolite, which again contains aluminium. So cryolite is nothing but 3Na sodium fluoride and aluminium fluoride AlF3. So just to overcome the problem associated with electrolyzing alumina in aqueous solution, the new so-called bath has been invented, which is cryolite bath. Okay, 3NAlF3. So in whole of, as I'm repeatedly trying to point out that aluminium extraction is unique. So aluminium extraction involves three major activities. First of all, involve preparation of high purity alumina from my natural resource. My natural resource is a bauxite, contains, what does it contain? It contains two mineral, gibbsite and diaspore, trihydrate and monohydrate. We need to prepare very high purity alumina from the natural resource, which cannot be done by conventional beneficiation route. We have to adopt a special route for this. Now, second stage is preparation of synthetic cryolite. Why we will come to that? So it is a special electrolyte we need to prepare, which is hello, yeah, is a special type of electrolyte which is cryolite 3NaFAlF3. We need to prepare that synthetically. And third stage is electrolytic extraction of aluminium using Hall-Héroult process. Hall-Héroult process of course involve identification of cryolite as my electrolytic media. Okay, this cryolite is part of Hall-Héroult process. So we will try to touch upon one by one all the three steps I am talking about. First of all, my first attempt will be to produce high purity alumina. So alumina is produced by Bayer's process. So this is not Hall-Héroult process. The alumina is extracted by Bayer's process. So the reason is that the electrolysis needs very, very high purity alumina, because otherwise if it is loaded with any impurity, that will get co-precipitated or co-deposited, not precipitation, co-deposited along with aluminium, so the required property can never be achieved. So we need to free alumina coming along with my ore, free from all type of impurity. So we need very highly pure alumina, and contains, as I mentioned, iron oxide, silica, titanium oxide as my impurity. In this, hello, yeah, some sound and background noise is coming. Some sound and background noise is coming. Whose mic is on? Someone's mic is on. Hello. Someone's microphone is on. Lot of sound is coming. Lot of sound is coming.
Sir, she is Nobonita.
Huh?
She is Nobonita.
Sorry. Looks to be someone's microphone is on.
No.
Switch off the microphone, please. Now, if we have in India, there are two types of ore available. One is very high in titanium, 5 to 10%, but low amount of silica, around 1.5%. But another class of ore is around 5% silica. 5% silica. So if it is contains around very low in titanium, the first category is high in titanium, low in silica, and the second category is low in titanium, high in silica. If the ore containing beyond 5% silica is not suitable for production of high purity Al2O3. We need to understand the production of Al2O3 Bayer's process. So little detail I am going to talk about on the how do we really approach the extraction part. So this is the overall flow sheet. If you look at the flow sheet, except crushing, grinding, classification, practically no other conventional beneficiation step is involved in this. Rest is completely different. So let us go one by one. My first stage of crushing, grinding is important because when we crush and grind it, then certain amount of, suppose we start with the ore which contains around 1.5% silica, during crushing and grinding, certain amount of finer fraction generates, finer fraction as fine as minus 100 mesh, and if we analyze that minus 100 mesh, we will find that silica gets segregated in the finer fraction. If we start with around 1.5% silica, then the silica content in the minus 100 mesh goes as high as 10%. So this is somewhat simply by crushing and grinding, we have certain amount of enrichment of alumina in the ore. Once that crushing and grinding has been done, then we go to the next stage. Next stage is leaching. Leaching is a part of hydrometallurgical operation. Leaching we have not covered. I am not sure whether you have even heard about the term. Are you aware of the terminology leaching?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good. So now this crushed and ground, after we somewhat get rid of alumina, get rid of silica in the finer fraction, the coarser fraction of enriched alumina bauxite is again and crushed and ground to my required size. This required size part is now goes to my next one as crushing of alumina with the crushed alumina is now ground with caustic soda. What is caustic soda? What is caustic soda? Sodium hydroxide, okay? Sodium hydroxide is written here. So now we are going for, instead of dry grinding of alumina, we are going for wet grinding of alumina with caustic soda. And it's done in ball mill, and we are making a slurry. Instead of a powder, we go to make slurry of Al2O3 and sodium hydroxide. Why do we go for, any idea about why do we go for wet crushing? Possibly you will not be knowing. So wet grinding is done because it is much more energetically efficient than dry grinding, because it takes much less time, therefore it saves lots of energy. And this is also is making a slurry which we will be treating in the next stage, because the leaching is also somewhat in the, not in the all solid state, it's in the liquid stage. So now this slurry is transferred into my leaching vessel. Leaching vessel is called a digester. This digester is an autoclave, because you have heard the name of autoclave? Have you heard the name of autoclave?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Yes or no?
No, sir. So autoclave.
No, sir.
Okay. Autoclave is basically is made of steel, a cylindrical unit or some other shape it can be, but conventionally what I have seen is in the form of cylindrical unit of different capacity. It can be operated at a fairly high temperature, fairly high in this sense. So for hydrometallurgy is concerned, 500 looks to be very, very high temperature. So my indication of fairly high temperature is below 500 or so, and very high pressure can be maintained. The pressure can be 50 atmosphere, 100 atmosphere, that sort of an atmosphere can be maintained within the chamber. So it's a it's a reactor which is a combination of high temperature and high pressure. We need a reactor which is a digester. Calling it a digester is nothing but an autoclave to bring alumina into solution. And to bring that or to do this part, bringing alumina into solution, my first of all, my requirement is somewhat high temperature. What is the temperature? If we look at monohydrate, the diaspora, okay, Al2O3H2O, it requires a temperature around 230 degree. The dissolution of monohydrate in sodium hydroxide. The other stage, the stage here, you can see my cursor? You can see my cursor? Yes?
Yes,
Okay, in this stage, we have not digested alumina in sodium hydroxide. We have simply made a slurry. Now we have to bring alumina into solution. And in doing that, I need to have, as I am mentioning, I need to have combination of the two, fairly high temperature and very high pressure. Why do I need to have those combination? Because if I talk about monohydrate, the dissolution temperature is around 230 degrees centigrade and it takes around 3 hours of time. Whereas if we talk about trihydrate, then the gypsum I'm talking about, gibbsite, I'm sorry, the gibbsite I'm talking about, gibbsite takes around 180 degrees centigrade and around 1 hour time. So make a compromise between these two, as my bauxite is mixture of the two. The temperature of the unit, the autoclave, is maintained somewhere around 180 to 220 degree. And look at the pressure part. 5 is very low side of the pressure. As high as 25 atmospheric pressure is applied. Why we did that? I will come to it. I'll come to that part. I'm just writing that to retain water as a liquid. I'll mention about or come back to this issue again. So at such a severe condition, that means temperature around 200 degrees centigrade, pressure around 25 atmosphere, the alumina gets dissolved or it gets dissolved in sodium hydroxide. The reaction is given at the bottom of the screen. Al2O3H2O, the monohydrate, or Al2O3 3H2O, the trihydrate, reacts with sodium hydroxide, the caustic soda, to give me sodium aluminate, 2NaAlO2 and H2O. Okay. This is the water part I'm talking about. So now what I have done is, rather what we have done is that we have, in the leaching stage, we have taken alumina into my solution in the form of a compound called sodium aluminate, twice NaAlO2. What next? Once it goes into solution, then rest of the things, rest of the impurity that is coming with the ore is not going into solution. Condition is maintained in such a way that there is practically no to very minimal dissolution of the impurities. So we are talking about a liquid which is more of importance to me in the form of sodium aluminate. This situation is now, it is under very high pressure. So the unit is first depressurized to normal atmosphere, and the liquor is then cooled down, because it was temperature was around 200, 180 to 220, take it averages 200 degrees centigrade. So it is depressurized and cooled down to little below 100 degrees centigrade. We have a reason for maintaining this temperature as well. In one go, we are talking about retention of water in the form of liquid. Another go, even after depressurization, we are maintaining a temperature of 100 degrees centigrade. Then this mixture or this entire thing containing my solution and all the impurities, they are put into a settling tank where the undissolved part of the impurities gets settled down, and then we wash the filter to remove again. It's the whatever comes out is called the red mud. Red mud basically contains iron, titania, part of alumina, and SiO2. And this becomes one of the important resources of TiO2. During settling, if we add certain amount of starch into it, it facilitates settling of red mud. So we get a fairly clear liquid. The, the clear liquid is basically sodium aluminate, but the process is not complete because this part, whatever is left, this goes to a series of washing and filtration. Filtration is done, whatever red mud is retained or cannot be settled in a settling tank must be removed. Okay, and for that the temperature is always maintained in the entire stretch of settling, washing and filtration. The temperature is maintained around 100 degrees centigrade. Again, I will touch upon why it is so. Once it is totally cleared, then the cleared solution of sodium aluminate is cooled below a critical temperature. Now we are bringing down the temperature below 100 degrees centigrade. You will immediately link it to why I am talking about so. So once I am bringing down the temperature below certain critical temperature, then aluminium gets deposited as AlOH whole thrice aluminium hydroxide, which was initially sodium aluminate, now precipitates out as aluminium hydroxide when the temperature is falling below certain critical temperature. So this is where the clue lies why we cannot, in this entire settling, washing and filtration stage, we cannot afford to bring down the temperature below 100 degrees centigrade. So once this fine or freshly prepared aluminium hydroxide is coming out, in fact we can add certain aluminium hydroxide as seed material which facilitates or hasten up the precipitation of AlOH whole thrice. So this is done. Now aluminium hydroxide precipitates out. We separate aluminium hydroxide and then go for it's separated from the liquid in series of thickener, filter and so on and so forth. Product we get from this stage is coarse hydroxide, aluminium hydroxide, which is finally calcined in a rotary kiln to produce anhydrous Al2O3. This is my raw material for the subsequent treatment. Any point or any clarification needed? Anything beyond what I have talked about? Hello?
Sir, a concept of thickness means
Concept is?
Yes, please repeat, sir. About thickness, sir, or how
About
this thickening.
thickening, first of all, you settle down. You have a liquor. Liquor contains, the liquid part contains basically sodium aluminate, NaLO2, and then rest of the material which are as impurity. Iron bearing material, silica, alumina, and TiO2, so on and so forth. Okay, these are insoluble component in the so-called leaching stage. Once this is done, then we take it to a settling tank. Mind it, whatever I am talking now, settling, washing, filtration, we are maintaining a temperature of around 100 degrees centigrade. Okay. So the whatever was undissolved, it gets settled down in the settling tank. Only we may not be able to settle 100% of the impurities. The impurity in together is called red mud because it looks completely red in color, and it is mud because it is full of water. Did you hear about a recent accident in Hindalco plant? Not very recent, 6 to 8 months back. There was a red mud pond. Okay, red mud was getting stacked up in a red mud pond. It was basically separated by a wall. After continuous unloading of red mud, the part of the boundary wall breached out. Then the entire red mud flow out and submerge part of a village. And good number of people died under red mud slurry. Have you heard about that accident?
No, sir.
It was not. It is within last 1 year. In fact, immediately after that, the Hindalco plant, Hindustan Aluminium Company, it was closed. So red mud is one of the major nuisance in the aluminium industry. And in fact there is no so-called commercial process available for complete utilization of red mud. Good number of effort is being going on to convert red mud into bricks, extraction of titanium from red mud, extraction of pure silicon from this, so and so forth. In fact, have you heard about Niti Aayog?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Niti Aayog has he is formulating a long-term plan for utilization of red mud. It's a very long-term plan going on. First of all, you take out iron content is fairly high, treat it at high temperature, take out iron, then leave it with silica and TiO2, then go for TiO2 extraction, and from TiO2, rutile, from rutile you can go for a different type of a product. Rutile itself has a fantastic product. Then you can extract titanium from it, and then you go for silica, which is leftover extraction of pure silicon from the residue. The holistic approach is being attempted for conversion of red mud for a series of valuable product, but nothing commercially available process has cropped up so far. So this is what I'm trying to talk about. This red mud. The red mud in the settling tank is separated, but it is not fully clear. Therefore, the liquid which contains a little amount of red mud or the impurity still now, it goes into a series of filter and the clarifier or filter process where the entire amount of red mud being carried over along with the liquid beyond the settling tank is separated. My important, this is a part of hydromet standard operation. This is not very critical about. What is criticality about is that the temperature has to be maintained very near to the boiling point of water. I will come to this. I will come to this. But for the time being, take this information that the temperature maintained in the settling, washing, filtration stage is maintained around as close as possible to the boiling point of water. How do we maintain it? We basically inject steam in the counter current fashion. See, the superhot steam is being passed through the liquid in the entire part. Okay. And the clue you must be getting now, as and when the liquid is completely free of my impurities, the temperature is brought down or it's cooled down below a critical value, temperature below a critical value, then sodium hydroxide starts precipitating out from the solution. This is what the clue is, that we do not want sodium hydroxide to be precipitated in the settling, washing or filtration stage. So we have to maintain the temperature above some critical value. Okay. I'll come to this again. I'll touch upon this again in the very next slide. So what I'm saying here is now, the moment it is cooled, sodium aluminate is now transformed into sodium hydroxide and precipitates out. We add certain amount of fresh sodium hydroxide in the solution to act as a seed which hastens up the so-called the settling or formation of the aluminum hydroxide. So what we'll end up is coarse particle of aluminum hydroxide. This aluminum hydroxide subsequently treated in rotary kiln to make pure Al2O3. Okay? Fine?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now I will come back to the issue of why do we maintain such a high pressure in the reactor and why do we maintain such critical temperature near 100 degrees centigrade. That is what I am talking as factor affecting Bayer's process. Factor affecting Bayer's process. Number one, the bauxite needs to be digested. Therefore, we need to have a finer particle of bauxite. During wet grinding or slurry making stage, we need to convert bauxite in a fine form. Finer the bauxite, better is the digestion in the liquid liquor. Okay, the leach liquor. Leach liquor is nothing but my caustic soda, sodium hydroxide. And I said the wet grinding is more efficient than dry grinding because it reduces time and therefore reduces less amount of energy. We are maintaining a temperature of around 120 degrees centigrade because high temperature, it facilitates digestion. If we are talking about monohydrate, we were needing a temperature of 230 degree. If we talk about trihydrate, then we are needing a temperature of around 180 degrees centigrade. That means we have to maintain a high temperature. High temperature facilitates your digestion, but at that high temperature, water has a tendency to evaporate. 180, 200 degrees centigrade, water part in the entire mixture will not be able to stay in the liquid form. We need to retain water in liquid form itself. Therefore, we have to apply very high pressure so as to minimize or avoid evaporation of water. Is the first point clear? Why do we maintain such a high pressure in autoclave?
Yes, sir.
Okay. For others, how many
Yes,
of you are?
sir.
11. Okay. How many of you are here? 11? Continue to be 11?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now the first point is clear that high temperature needed to facilitate digestion. High pressure is needed to retain water in liquid form. Okay. Now the second point what I was talking about, why do we wish to maintain or need to maintain the temperature of the entire settling, clarification and filtration stage near 100 degrees centigrade? Its simple reason is that if the temperature is below 100 or very lower than 100 degrees centigrade, then aluminium hydroxide, because my solution is completely pregnant with sodium aluminate, the moment temperature goes below certain temperature, aluminium hydroxide will start precipitating out. So where it is getting precipitate? It is precipitating out in the settling filtration stage or even clarification stage, settling, clarification and filtration stage. So the value of which is alumina Al2O3 aluminum hydroxide for the time being is getting lost because it is precipitating out along with my or getting lost along with my gangue material. We cannot afford that. We cannot afford to bring down the temperature which makes AlOH whole size to precipitate out. To prevent precipitation of AlOH, aluminum hydroxide, we have to maintain the temperature somewhere near 100 degrees centigrade. Okay? Is this issue clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that is in the very next stage. You see that we bring down temperature below critical temperature. Because once we remove everything, we need to bring down temperature. We maintain 100 degree here, but we intentionally bring down the temperature in the next stage, in the precipitation stage, where Al aluminum hydroxide precipitates out from solution. Okay, that is where my crask or clue lies. How to avoid precipitation here, how to facilitate precipitation here. Okay, and during precipitation stage, we do not take out the entire amount of AlOH whole thrice. That means we do not extend the reaction to completion. There is a chance of SiO2 is from solution is getting precipitated out. So we want to avoid the precipitation of SiO2, and this precipitation, SiO2 precipitation, will trigger only when we have more or less complete precipitation of aluminum hydroxide. So we do not bring the end precipitation to completion, we leave it before it so that we can avoid precipitation of silica and avoid contamination of aluminum hydroxide. Okay, and finally we said that aluminum hydroxide needs to be calcined, and the calcination is done in a rotary kiln where the temperature must be maintained as high as 1400 degree centigrade. Now we have got my raw material in the form of pure alumina for my subsequent treatment. My subsequent treatment or next treatment is how do we produce the cryolite, because cryolite is an integral component of my Hall-Héroult process for extraction of aluminium. But if you look at cryolite is a natural product. Okay, cryolite is a natural mineral which can dissolve up to around 15% alumina at around 1000 degrees centigrade. It's a naturally occurring mineral. So we say that 3NaFeAlF3, or we can combine them together as Na3AlF6, which can dissolve up to around 15% alumina at 1000 degrees centigrade, but we may not have enough amount of naturally occurring cryolite. Therefore, effort was directed to make synthetic cryolite. Not a very easy process. The process is basically hydrogen fluoride. It's basically my first step to produce hydrogen fluoride by reacting natural fluorspar. Natural fluorspar is calcium fluoride with sulfuric acid to give me hydrogen fluoride in aqueous solution. This is a condensed phase of calcium fluoride, and the aqueous phase of sodium hydroxide sulfuric acid gives me calcium sulfate in the form of condensed phase and hydrogen fluoride in aqueous phase. This hydrogen fluoride is passed through sodium aluminate solution to ultimately give me the cryolite. There is a very big so-called the flow sheet to make cryolite. I am trying to avoid that long flow sheet. How do we go for synthetic preparation? Because we have an option of using either naturally occurring cryolite or synthetically prepared or a mixture of it. In fact, most of the countries are going through using both the options, that it's a mixture of synthetically prepared and naturally occurring. For India, we do not have resource or source of cryolite. Both naturally occurring and synthetically prepared cryolite is imported for aluminium extraction. So we have cryolite. So I'm getting ready for my final stage. Final stage will be extraction of aluminium. So we have produced pure Al2O3. We have a resource of cryolite either from natural part, or we have a synthetic route for production of cryolite. Then we will go for the extraction of alumina, and it is electrolytic process. Okay, I wish we have, you know little bit of electrolysis in your school days.
Yes, sir. I know.
Okay, so it is not a completely foreign word to all of you, and but the detail has not been covered. So in this will be covered is well within your knowledge base. So what I am trying is somewhat new to you, which has not been covered, that in a electrolytic cell, I am taking example of alumina or aluminium production. How do we determine what is the potential difference that has to be maintained? I think this has not been taught to you. This has not been taught to you. Someone please respond. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Do you know how to
No,
calculate?
sir.
Huh?
No,
Yes,
sir.
tell me. I know, not yes and no. Either yes or no. How to calculate the decomposition? How to calculate the potential difference that has to be maintained, or the decomposition potential? Has it been taught to you?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, fine. So let us take an example of aluminium. Okay, aluminium Al2O3 decomposition potential, because I'll be employing electrolytic process. So first of all, my basis I'm considering as 1 mole of product aluminium in liquid form. This is what is my basis. And I write down the overall decomposition reaction as my basis is 1 mole of aluminium liquid. The reaction is balanced accordingly. Okay, reaction balance gives me 0.5 alumina. It is dissolved in my cryolite. Okay, 0.5 alumina dissolved in cryolite gives on decomposition aluminium liquid and 0.75 oxygen in the form of a gas. So for the time being, let us call it, this is where it is going to be deposited. It will be basically the cathode aluminium, and anode will be oxygen. Let us consider a situation. Anode is oxygen anode and aluminium cathode. For ease of my understanding, I am doing that simplification. There's nothing more is there. For this reaction, I give delta G1 as my free energy change. In this, you have noted that the Al2O3 is in solution with cryolite. Therefore, it is not a one-stage process. It can be multi-stage process. It has to be multi-stage process. Now, if I go to the fundamental reaction, alumina has to be produced. So, alumina is nothing but aluminium plus 0.75 oxygen gives me 0.5 Al2O3 condensed phase, because I am going by this balance of this reaction. So aluminium liquid 0.75 oxygen gives me 0.5 Al2O3. Al liquid is my basis. So I give it as delta G2. Then 0.5 alumina goes in the liquid form, G3, delta G3, and 0.5 alumina is reacting with cryolite in the liquid form to give me 0.5 alumina in solution of aluminium in the cryolite. So G5, I mean it should be G4, I'm so sorry. It should be G4. Okay, make a correction. It will be G4. So I have overall reaction and I have 3 reactions in series which will ultimately lead to my G, or the first reaction A. Okay. How do we calculate the free energy changes for this? Suppose we are maintaining the shell temperature at 1000 degrees centigrade. What will be my electrical, so-called the electrolysis process at that temperature? So I'm trying to calculate the free energy changes for each of the reaction. At 1000 degree, this is my standard reaction. Yellingen diagram, if you go to, what is the basis of Yellingen diagram? What is the basis of Yellingen diagram?
Sir, a stability at a
No,
range of
what is the
temperature.
basis? What is the basis of the
Free
drawing
energy.
this? Uh, Suppose I have a M plus O, or M plus O2 is equal to MO2. Which one is taken as the best? Metal or oxygen? Oh, which one is taken as basis? for all the lines you will see, go back to Elingham diagram, you will find in all the reactions you have only 1
Oxygen.
mole of oxygen.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So here also we go back to the same principle. We are taking 1 mole of oxygen because that is where my delta G is known. G as a function of temperature is drawn as a basis of 1 mole of oxygen. So here I have considered 1 mole of oxygen, 4/3 aluminium, 1 mole oxygen, give me 2/3 alumina. So the free energy change is 206 kilocalories at 1000 degrees centigrade. But what is my reaction? What is my reaction? It is not 1 mole of oxygen. What is my reaction? 0.75 oxygen. Right? Go back to, can you see my cursor? Can you see my cursor?
Yes, sir.
In this reaction, we are writing 0.75 oxygen and we are calculating delta G as 1 oxygen. Therefore, this has to be converted to 0.75. 0.75 is nothing but 3/4. So I have for this reaction, free energy change is minus 206 multiplied by 3/4, which lands up to a value of negative 154.5 kilocalories per mole. It's fine? Hello?
Yes, sir. It's fine.
I'm not getting a response from anyone else. I'm not getting a response. Are they with me or all of you did understand?
Yes, sir.
People are just
Yes,
joined,
sir.
I think. Okay. All these three known voices coming up continuously. Okay. And so I have delta G2, then delta G3, which is nothing but heat of fusion. Standard heat of fusion data is available in literature at 1000 degrees centigrade. It turns out to be positive 3800 calories. Can you tell me why it is positive? In this case, we had a negative, but in this case, we had a positive. Okay. So we have the delta G3 as positive 3800. You can find it out from any standard heat of fusion data. Then delta G4, this is not delta G5, delta G4, which corresponds to dissolution of alumina in cryolite. Dissolution of alumina in cryolite at 1000 degrees centigrade. Now we have, what is the reaction? It can go up to the so-called minus RTLN activity. From thermodynamics, straightforward. I think it's known,
Yes.
understood.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay. So delta G4 is minus RTLN activity of alumina into the solution. This value is not unique. You can change the value of 8%. I'm just considering 8% alumina in the bath. So rest is cryolite. If you calculate the mole fraction, then the mole fraction will turn out of alumina to be turned out, it will turn out to be 0.15. For 8% alumina in the bath, rest being cryolite, mole fraction of alumina in the bath is 0.15. Now it is, if we consider it as an ideal solution, that is where activity is equal to mole fraction, then we can straight away find the delta G4 is equal to RT ln 0.15 by 2. Why 0.15 by 2? Because 0.5 alumina is involved in the reaction. We need to, this is for 1 mole of alumina, but my reaction says it is for 0.5 alumina. So therefore, we are converting the entire G4 value, dividing it by 2 to make it amenable to 0.5 alumina. So it turns out to be minus 4750 calories. Okay, you can repeat this calculation. So what is my G1, the delta G for the overall reaction, G4, G2, G3, G4, and you will get a value of minus 153,500. There is 150 will be coming, a little different. It will be actually 153,550. I have omitted that 50 here just for ease of my calculation. So it will turn out to be that delta G1 is equal to negative 153,500, omitting 50 here. And Faraday's law, you know Faraday's law, delta G is equal to, this is the only thing I am using from electrolysis. Delta G is equal to minus ZFE. This is known to you? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
This is known to you?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Faraday's.
I'm only using this equation. The delta G is equal to minus ZFE. Z is the number of electron transfer, F is the Faraday constant, E is the potential difference or decomposition potential. We know Faraday's constant. I somehow, unfortunately, I encountered a couple of different values for this. I am not very sure if it is absolutely the pinpointed value or not. It may be a little different. This is what the value I encountered. 96,877 joules. Now, left hand side is known to me. Delta G is known to me. Z is the number of electron transfer. What is the number of electron transfer? What is the valency of aluminium? Al2O3. 3. So Z is equal to 3. F is equal to this value. Only E is unknown. So my decomposition potential is nothing but this. So here is a negative sign. Here is a negative sign. My expression becomes positive. I can calculate E as is equal to 2.2 volt. Okay. Look at this. There is a multiplication factor 4.2. It's because my left hand side is in calories and Faraday constant is in joule. It's a conversion of joule to calorie. So, and we ultimately come to a value of E is equal to 2.2 volt. Okay, so this is how we calculate decomposition potential. Allow me to go to one more slide before I wind up today. So we have here that the oxygen evolved is not reacting with anywhere. Under that condition, we got the decomposition potential as 2.2 volt. But in reality, if you go to the Hall-Héroult cell, there we have carbon, graphite as my electrode. Graphite is used as the anode. So what happens if graphite is there in conjunction with oxygen evolved? How does my decomposition potential changes? That is what I am going to try. So what I am saying is that in practice, consumable graphite electrode is my anode. Therefore, we need to consider two following reactions. Two following reactions are 0.75 oxygen Why did I use 0.75 oxygen? It's simply because of here we produce 0.75 oxygen. So I'm taking the same stoichiometry for my subsequent calculation. So 0.75 oxygen reacts with 0.75 carbon to give me 0.75 CO2. Similarly, 0.75 oxygen, double the amount of carbon gives me double the amount of carbon monoxide. So this is where the two reactions that may happen. So from here, I calculate G5 and G6. G5 and G6. What caution has to be exercised in calculating G here? What caution has to be exercised? I have directly given the value of G5 and G6. Tell me what caution has to be exercised.
So O2 is 0.75 moles, so it should be like in standard 1. So that in that
Okay.
accordance, we need to change the calculations.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. You understood that from the standard Lillingham diagram, we will be getting the value for 1 mole of oxygen, but my reaction involves 0.75 oxygen. Therefore, the value needs to be suitably modified. So with that modification, I land up with a G5, G6 as such and such. So you combine this reaction with reaction A. What is my reaction A? The overall reaction. My overall reaction was 0.5 alumina giving me aluminium and 0.75 oxygen. So I combine this reaction with first reaction with the CO2 reaction. So my reaction becomes 0.5 alumina, 0.75 carbon gives me aluminium plus 0.75 CO2. Now if you go back and follow the same procedure as just now I have pointed out here, I have pointed out how to calculate the decomposition potential. If you follow the same procedure, you will end up with a decomposition potential of 1.19 volt. And if we combine reaction A with the CO reaction, then we will get a E value of 1.05 volt. What does it indicate? What does it say? What is the outcome of this? That if there is no carbon present, then my decomposition potential was 2.2 volt. But in presence of carbon, either through formation of CO2 or through formation of CO, my decomposition potential substantially come down from 2.2 to 1.19 or 1.05. That is what I am summarizing as presence of graphite helps decomposition of alumina by formation of CO or CO2. So this is where I end today. Any question? Any question so far?
No, sir.
Not till now, sir.
Okay. Then I will stop here today. Hopefully I will finish up the entire presentation by